1964, I met this monstrous whale shark, 36 feet long. And when I took the photos to the press, it was absolute front page around the world. I don't look for pretty pictures, I look for stories. It started off as a hobby, and then I got so good at it that I started to discovering shipwrecks in my films. I did a lot of films with discovering shipwrecks. I've sat with Murdoch and had a beer at the back of the boat. But you try and see Murdoch in the real, you wouldn't get to him. That's the wonderful thing about when you get back in nature, even the biggest, most important comes down to your level, because your level is just nature. When I was 3 years old, I had my first dive. I didn't mean to. We lived on the Solomon Islands. My father was a missionary, and we had a little coral reef down the front. And I was down there, low tide, looking at all the beautiful little coral fish in the pools, and I fell in. I was 3. And my sister luckily saw me, head under, feet waggling up top, and pulled me out, otherwise I would have drowned. But that was my first dive at 3. From then on, I wanted to be in the water. And when I was about 14, I took up spearfishing. You couldn't buy flippers, you couldn't buy masks or spear guns. You had to make everything yourself. So I learned to make my own spear guns, my own mask, and I didn't wear a snorkel or flippers for the first few years. Actually, I didn't wear a snorkel for the first 10 years. So it was a very primitive start. That was in the 50s that I was just spearfishing. But in the 60s, I started to look at the possibility of making films. 62, I started making documentaries. But we made them on sharks because the people had this love-hate about sharks, and anything sharks was front page. So we started making films on sharks and actually killing sharks. The average person thought the only good shark was a dead shark. So if we killed it, that was good. But then about 1964, I met this monstrous whale shark, 36 feet long. If you imagine, what's that, 10, 11 meters long? And I swam with it, sat on its back, and so forth. And when I took the photos to the press, it was absolute front page around the world. It was such a big news item because no one had ever got photographs of a little diver riding on the back of a big shark. And it changed my attitude. I thought, I'm better off filming sharks, not killing them. And that was when I changed and started to become a conservationist. When we were spearfishing, we didn't study, we didn't carefully look. We saw a fish, concentrated, went down, bang, and we never really saw what was around us. But when I took up a camera, it was a different thing altogether. I started to see all these fish, all these activities around me. I wasn't concentrated just on one coral trout to spear. And that's when I started to really learn about the Barrier Reef a lot more. I became an expert observer because down there with the camera, I had to really, really observe everything to get the footage. If you take a photo, I believe a photo should tell a story. This one, that's taken 3 feet away, 1 meter, and that would be my biggest selling photo. That has been on the front of so many magazines, including Tyne magazine. It's one of those photos that when you get it, everyone wants to buy it. Go to YouTube, whatever. Facebook, you're seeing lots and lots of beautiful pictures. They're very common. But to see something that tells you a story, that's the photo. That's the one you sell. That's the one that can become a cover shot in a magazine because it tells a story. I don't look for pretty pictures, I look for stories. And you just see them, find them. When you get them, a pretty picture is like 10 seconds on film. A story is like a couple of minutes. So you're looking for a lot of stories to make up a 1-hour film. It started off as a hobby, and then I got so good at it that I started to discovering shipwrecks in my films. I did a lot of films with discovering shipwrecks, and that's still my hobby now. I get a big kick out of discovering a shipwreck, exploring. It's one of the few things you can still discover in this world or in Australia. There's not much else you can discover, but you can discover shipwrecks because even though I've found over 100, there's still another 1,000. So I can keep going. You're away from everything. There's no noise. Well, there is little cracklings and so forth, but there's no noise. And even if you go under with all the worries, business or whatever, it disappears underwater. That's the beauty of it, because there's so much activity going on that takes your attention away from any problems you had on land. And that's the beauty of it. I've sat with Murdoch and had a beer at the back of the boat. But you try and see Murdoch in the reel, you wouldn't get there. You wouldn't get to him. But out on the reef, we're both equals. You know, have a beer. And I remember I had on board the world boss of IBM. IBM was the biggest company in the world. We're sitting in the back having a beer. And that's the wonderful thing about when you get back in nature, even the biggest, most important comes down to your level, because your level is just nature. And they come down to that level. They're not a mogul or anything like that anymore. They're just out enjoying nature. We must not think we're gods, that we're better than nature or we're going to change nature. You know, we must accept that we are part of nature. It's another world that you've stepped into. And yeah, and people are finding that out. It's a real escape.